It began with a single footfall in a narrow, dusty street in Strasbourg. It was July, the height of a blistering summer in 1518, when a woman named Frau Troffea stepped out of her home and started to dance. There was no music. There was no wedding, no festival, and no reason for celebration. She simply moved, her body jerking and swaying with a violent, rhythmic intensity that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. At first, her neighbors watched with mild amusement, perhaps assuming it was a joke or a temporary fit of madness. But as the hours turned into evening and the evening turned into night, Frau Troffea did not stop. She didn't stop for food, she didn't stop for water, and she didn't stop even when her shoes were soaked through with blood. She danced until she collapsed from exhaustion, only to twitch back to life the moment she regained consciousness, her feet finding the rhythm once more. By the end of the first week, 34 people had joined her. By the end of the month, the number had swollen to 400. This wasn't a party, it was a slow-motion catastrophe. Men, women, and children were caught in a trance-like state. Their faces twisted in agony and exhaustion, yet their limbs refused to stay still. This was the beginning of the most documented and terrifying instance of mass hysteria in human history. To understand how a city could lose its mind, you have to understand the world these people lived in. Strasbourg in 1518 was a place of extreme suffering. The preceding years had been a relentless gauntlet of failed harvests, skyrocketing grain prices, and a resurgence of the plague. Syphilis was tearing through the population, and the shadow of the Holy Roman Empire felt heavy and unforgiving. People were living on the razor's edge of survival, their nerves frayed by the constant threat of starvation and divine punishment. The city's leaders, the magistrates, and the clergy were baffled. They didn't see this as a crime, but as a medical or spiritual crisis. They consulted the leading physicians of the day, who reached a diagnosis that, in hindsight, seems almost absurdly tragic. They claimed the dancers were suffering from hot blood. Their bodies were literally overheating from within, and the only way to cool the blood and end the mania was for the victims to dance it out of their systems. In what would become one of the most disastrous public health decisions in history, the city council decided to facilitate the plague. They cleared open spaces. They built a massive wooden stage in the center of the market. They even hired professional pipers and drummers to keep the tempo, believing that if they could just push the dancers to their physical limits, the hot blood would subside. The result was a massacre of movement. The sound of the drums didn't soothe the dancers. It acted like a whip, driving them into an even deeper frenzy. Under the sweltering July sun, the stage became a scene of horror. People who had been dancing for days on end began to die. Some suffered heart attacks, others collapsed from heat stroke or sheer physical dehydration. Contemporaries recorded that at its peak, the dancing plague was claiming up to 15 lives every single day. For centuries, we looked back at 1518 as a bizarre fable or a piece of medieval folklore, but the evidence is undeniable. We have the city council notes, the physicians' reports, and the sermons of the local cathedral. This happened, and for a long time, modern science thought it had found the culprit in a tiny fungus called ergot. Ergot grows on damp rye, the primary grain used for bread in the 16th century. It contains alkaloids chemically related to LSD. When people eat infected bread, they can experience vivid hallucinations, tremors, and violent convulsions. It seemed like the perfect explanation. A city accidentally poisoned by its own food supply, hallucinating their way into a collective trance. But there is a major problem with the ergot theory. While the fungus causes convulsions and tremors, it does not provide the coordination or the stamina required to dance for several days. Ergotism usually restricts blood flow to the limbs, making it difficult to move, let alone perform a complex, sustained physical activity. If the people of Strasbourg had been poisoned by ergot, they wouldn't have been dancing. They would have been dying in agony on the ground, unable to stand. This leaves us with a far more uncomfortable reality. If it wasn't a chemical poison, then the cause was psychological. Modern historians and psychologists now categorize the event as a mass psychogenic illness, triggered by what they call a state of extreme psychological distress. Think of the human mind like a pressure cooker. The people of Strasbourg were living under a level of stress that is almost impossible for us to fathom. They were starving, they were sick, and they were terrified of a god they believed was punishing them. In their culture, there was a specific fear of a figure named Saint Vitus, a martyr who was believed to have the power to curse sinners with a dancing plague. This cultural belief provided the script for their breakdown. When Frau Troffea began to dance, her neighbors didn't just see a woman having a seizure, they saw the curse of Saint Vitus. Their brains, already pushed to the breaking point by trauma, accepted this reality. The dancing was a physical manifestation of a collective mental collapse, a way for the brain to externalize an internal pain that had become unbearable. The dancing plague of 1518 eventually ended, not through medicine but through a different kind of ritual. The city council realized their mistake and banned all dancing in the city. They rounded up the remaining survivors and took them to a shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus in the nearby mountains. There they were given small crosses and red shoes, and they were led in a series of religious ceremonies. Slowly the rhythm left their bodies. The trance broke. This story matters because it challenges our perception of ourselves as rational, independent actors. We like to believe that we are in total control of our bodies and our minds, but history suggests otherwise. We are deeply social creatures, tuned to the frequencies of those around us. When a group of people is subjected to the same extreme pressures and shares the same deep-seated fears, the boundary between one person's mind and the next can begin to blur. We see echoes of Strasbourg in more recent history. The Tanganyika laughter epidemic of 1962, where hundreds of students couldn't stop laughing for months, or the sudden onset of motor tics in groups of teenagers in the social media age. These aren't just fads. They are physical symptoms of a psychological environment that has become too toxic to process. The events of 1518 remind us that our environment shapes our biology. We are not just machines driven by chemistry, we are stories driven by culture, fear, and the desperate need to find a way out of our suffering. The dancing plague was a cry for help that the city tried to answer with more of what was killing them. When the music finally stopped in Strasbourg, the streets fell silent, but the questions remained. How much of our own behavior is truly ours, and how much is a response to the world we've built around us? We may think we are far removed from the superstitions of the 16th century, but the human brain hasn't changed. It is still a fragile, beautiful, and terrifying thing, capable of dancing itself to death if the world becomes too heavy to carry. In the end, the dancing plague of 1518 isn't just a historical oddity, it is a mirror. It shows us that under the right or wrong circumstances, any of us could find ourselves caught in a rhythm we didn't start, unable to stop, waiting for a silence that might never come.